Good afternoon, I'm Justin MD1. We discuss about genetic alteration. What is genetic alteration? Any change in the DNA shelter the genetic code and therefore may alter the synthesis of the protein that it encodes. Genetic alteration is a chromosomal abnormalities often emerge during cells division and can be structural or numeric. Chromosome, a structure found inside the nucleus of a cell. A chromosome is made up of proteins and DNA organized into genes. A chromosome contains a single long DNA molecule, only a portion of which corresponds to a single gene. Humans have approximately 20,000 genes arranged on their chromosomes. The short arm of the chromosome is known as the P arm, and the long arm of the chromosome is known as the Q arm. Each chromosome includes a compression point called the centromere, which divides the chromosome into two portions or arms. Now, in DNA. DNA are self-reflecting materials that is present in nearly all living organisms as the main constituent of chromosomes. It is the carrier of genetic information. All complex molecule that carries all the data required to create and maintain a creature. The double helix is the spiral formed by two long strands of nucleotides. The base pair serve as the ladder rings and the sugar and phosphate molecules serve as the ladder vertical side spaces in the double helix shape. And that's all.
Good afternoon. I am Marie Cristel Serna and I will be discussing with you what is selective breeding. Since the word breeding is not new to us, this will surely give us the overview of what selective breeding is. Because from the word breeding, it is a sexual reproduction that produces offspring, usually animals or plants. So same rin sila sa selective breeding. What is selective breeding? Selective breeding, or also known as artificial selection, it is a process in which humans use animal breeding and plant breeding to selectively develop particular phenotypic traits or characteristics. Like for example sa animals, pag ang type of dogs for male is bulldog, then another type of dog for female is mastiff, tapos nag-mate sila, then they will produce an offspring which is ang bull mastiff. Makitaan ang offspring ani niya sa example is makitaan ni siya sa module. Selective breeding involves selecting parents with particular traits to breed together and produce offspring with more desirable traits. And also take note that selective breeding already happened around 30,000 years ago. So since selective breeding cannot only use animals lang, but also this can be used in plants. So sa makita niyo, this is the example of selective breeding sa animals. As you can see na ay golden retriever, dachshund, and then the offspring retriever dachshund. So if ever ang male kay ang golden retriever tapos ang female is ang dachshund, then if magmate sila, they will come up or they will produce an offspring nga maka-inherit sa ilahang respective traits, which is ang retriever dachshund. So mao na siya ang example of selective breeding sa animals. As you can see sa example of selective breeding sa plants is na siya population 1 and population 2. So population 1 is na selected parents which is ang gi-highlight. So if kana ang selective parents, since plants man siya, so if na pollination mahitabo, then it will produce an offspring na makita na to sa population 2. So, ang offspring is maka-inherit na siya iba't ibang traits nga nagi-own sa selected parents. So, mao na siya ang example sa selective breeding but in plants.
So, in 1973, two scientists worked together named Herbert Boyer and Stanley Cohen to successfully engineer a genetically engineered organism. So, if you are wondering what type of organism do they use, so the animal they used was a mouse. And if you're also wondering, giunsam nila ang mouse, nganong mauman ang first genetically engineered organism. So to make it short guys, ilang gibuhat is nagkat sila gene sa mouse na naga-encode og antibiotic resistance sa isa ka strain. So, pasabot isa ka particular nga mouse or isa ka strain sa mouse. And ilang gibuhat is ilang gipaste ang gene na ilang gikat to another strain. So, I believe what this meant sa ilang gibuhat is mura nilag mas gipaisog pa or mas gipa-strong ang bacterium resistance sa mouse. And after nila na-observe na ang mouse lives or buhi ang mouse, then they gather the data na successful ilang goal. Then they considered it as successful. Then, regarding sa akong giingon, this leads us to the method na ilang na-discover along the way. So, the process is katong akong giingon na nag-cut sila og gene from one strain and paste it to another strain. So, diri nagsugod ilang discovery sa genetically engineered organism. So, moving on, after a year later of their discovery, Rodolphe Janisch and Beatrice Mintz utilized a similar procedure in animals. They introduced foreign DNA into mouse embryos. So karon, ilang level up ilang way and procedure to alter or genetically engineer na experiment. So basically, since it is stated naga-introduce na sila og foreign DNA into mouse embryo, so it means foreign lahi na siya nga strain or lahi na o dili strain, lahi na siya nga animal nga ilang gina-extract or gina-inject sa mouse embryo. So kabalo man siguro taon sa hinawong anang embryo. So warning lang sa mga lod-anon, mag-show kog picture diri sa mouse embryo. So this is it, mao ni siya. So technically, if ilang ingon is foreign, pasabot kanina panahon they are trying to make another species of a mouse. Base siguro ang mga result atong nga experiment before is naga-exist pa karon. Bitaw, we don't know yet since experiments are run through many trials and outcomes are different of course. Tungod ani nga mga discovery, mas nidaghan ang nagka-interest or possibly mas nidaghan ang investors, mas nidaghan ang mga opportunities na na-open para mas i-explore pa og maayo ang mismong field. But then again, dili nato kalimtan ning mga necessary which are I believe effect on human health and effect on ecosystems. And that is reality. So this topic will be discussed by Mr. Castino later. Again, we cannot expect tests and trials to always have positive effects and outcomes, mostly jud negative. But as stated, bisan pa ang effects are already said na ani nga panahon or naga-occur na, nagapadayon gihapon ang mga scientists to explore and experiment the field of genetic alteration or genetic engineering. Genetic engineering technology is quickly advancing. Researchers have recently developed a new technology called CRISPR. So let us define first what is CRISPR or CRISPR. So CRISPR stands for clustered, regularly interspaced, short, palindromic repeats. So unsa man ang CRISPR Paul? Tao ba na siya? Animal? Well, technically, no. It is a protein na nag-serve as an editing tool sa mga scientists to alter or engineer a gene. So unsa man ilang or unsa man na giunsa man na nila pagbuhat sad. So ilang procedure to use CRISPR, also known as CRISPR, is that gina-extract nila ang gene sulod sa isa ka testing plate, then they have procedure to also extract the results they need, but actually deep na kayo ni if ato pang explore jud step by step, but it is good to know na this is how it works. So this technology could be used to expedite development, pasabot magpapaspas sa development of useful genetically engineered crops, facilitate disease elimination, cosmetic intervention, or even alter ecosystems. So ako ang nahuna-unahan aning genetically engineered crops is that pwede makabuhat og ang mga scientist og mga plants nga kanang mas improve ba ang benefit sa plant. Like for example, an apple. So if ilahan ng alter sila, mag-experiment sila, mag-run sila og trials nga ikadaghan, tapos ilang ma-achieve ang goal na murag mas madungagan pa ang mga benefit nga makuha if i-consume sa tao, is that considered na siya nga genetically engineered crop, as long as nga kanang mapadayon lang na siya og produce, like kung sa mga ang mahimong kanang tawag ana, mahimong offspring sa gikan sa liso ana nga certain nga apple is same lang gihapon siya nakuha or na-adapt, is that considered na siya. So facilitate disease elimination. So imagine unsa ka helpful ang kani nga technology, like one day siguro makabuhat na og kanang mga cure sa kanang cancers nga antud karon wala pagi kanang 100% good ga cure good like ing ana. So what does that mean? So simply put it like this: CRISPR technology is now a thing, or now that it exists. Now we have to understand na ang CRISPR is a big stepping stone for us again. Na gina-enable niya ang detecting, editing, destroying, or even adding a DNA. So kani nga mga pamaagi, imbis na tinambanon or i-manual sa mga scientist og kuha-kuha, uh, kanig mas ginapadali niya since mura na lang og naay micro device to do their work or to do the scientist work. To maghatag kog metaphor ha. So naay isa ka magsasaka nga naga-manual og tanom, while ang isa ka magsasaka is nagagamit og new technology machine. So akong pasabot sa manual is nagakamot, like iyaha pa ng baktason tanan tapos isa-isa og tanom. While ang isa is nagagamit og new technology nga kanang automatic na nga magtanom, like gamit lang siya og remote control or whatsoever. So mas mapadali iyang work. So kung i-relate nato siya sa CRISPR, mura siya og ingani ka dako nga tabang sa mga scientists, like mao tong ingon ganina expedite development kay mas paspas man siya nga makuan tapos accurate pod. So basically ingani ka useful ang CRISPR sa scientists in a field of genetic engineering technology. So for us to proceed now, Mr. Castino will take care of the rest. Thank you.
So, before we tackle our next topic, let's look back to the figure 4, which is the timeline on how genetic modification developed through time. And as you can see, even though our ancestors did not understand genetics, they have been modifying species' genetic makeup for nearly 30,000 years through a technique known as the selective breeding or artificial selection. And in the next timeline, plant artificial selection has been documented as early as 7,800 BCE. On the next one, the first genetically engineered organism was created on the year 1973. And in this year, it marks the beginning of the GMO revolution. And also because of this, it caused the media, politicians, and scientists na mag-express ng kanilang concern on the possible effects ng GMO or the genetically engineered organism on human health and Earth's ecosystem. But other scientists, attorneys, and government representatives argued the safety of GE experiments at the Asilomar Conference. That's in the year 1975, and they came with the conclusion that the GA projects should be permitted to continue. And despite the fact that the GMO controversy is still ongoing, the scientific community they determined that GE food is safe And dahil dito, the US Supreme Court approved GE organism patenting in the year 1980. And next, on the year 1982, it is where yung first genetically modified food for human consumption, which is ito yung human insulin for the treatment of diabetes, has received its approval from the FDA. And by the year 1992, the FDA regulation, they mandate that foods derived from GMO plants have to adhere to the same criteria, including safety requirements as food derived from traditional bred plants. The first genetically modified organism or crop was a tomato. And it becomes commercially available in this year after a research analyzed by federal agencies demonstrated na this GMO was safe as conventionally cultivated tomatoes. As you can see, from the year 1990s and up, it is the year where the first batch of genetically modified organisms were produced like summer squash, soybeans, cotton, corn, papayas, tomatoes, and canola, which became accessible to consumers, but not all of them are still for sale. And additionally, in the year 1995, the US EPA approves the first insecticide producing crop. And in the next year, herbicide resistant crops were introduced. As the years went by, as you can see, on our timeline, scientists continued to come up with strategies to produce new breeds of plants and animals. As year goes by, they develop a technique called genome editing. As we all know, until now, nag-improve dyan itong mga scientists on producing genetically modified organisms. And now, let's proceed to the next topic, which is all about the genetically modified organisms versus the ecosystem. So, kabalo man ta, or we know what is ecosystem. But just to define, ecosystem is ito yung interaction between sa environment and the living organisms. Or to say is ecosystem is ito yung community where the biotic or yung biotic which are the living parts and the abiotic which is the non-living parts elements interact with each other. And now, what is this genetically modified organisms? So, humans have been altering the genetics of plants for thousands of years through the slow process of crossbreeding between crops. And as of today, scientists can take a shortcut sa pagmodify sa plants by editing ang ilahang DNA sa lab setting. And genetically modified organisms, or the GMOs, these are living organisms that have had their genes altered in some way, which is also called bioengineering. And these GMOs are crops like corn or potatoes na have been modified in a lab to boost ang ilahang quantity or ang kanilang quality of food they produce. But di lang siya all about crops. They can also be animals or microbes. And GMO crops provide a lot of benefits. But bisan pagdagan kag benefits, there are still other organizations that are worried that they might have bad effects or bad health effects. And according to Megan L. Norris, she is a biomedical researcher at the UT Southwestern Medical Center. She said that GMOs are designed to be extra healthy, extra fast growing, and extra resistant to weather or pests. And so there are several benefits of modified foods since scientists may choose the best features to add in these GMO crops. One of the pros is it uses fewer pesticides. Many GMO crops have undergone modification to make them less sila makapitan og pest og insects. For instance, there is a crop which is called a BT corn, which is a GMO crop that incorporates a gene from the naturally occurring soil bacterium, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. And this gene makes the corn create a protein that kills several insects and pests assisting in the plant's defense against harm. And because these crops have already have an innate pesticide, di na siya kailangan i-treat with a sophisticated pesticide anymore. And on crops like the BT corn, this means that yung mga farmers natin di na kailangan mag-apply ng maraming pesticides. And according to a 2020 study, farmers who grow GMO crops decreased their pesticide use by 8.3% between 1996 to 2018, which is approximately 775.4 million kilos of pesticides. And also, dahil fewer pesticides ang ginagamit sa crops, it may lead to fewer health risks for people eating them and less damage sa environment. Next is, it often costs less because itong GMO crops, they are engineered para ma-develop quickly. So farmers, they can produce the same amount of food with less chemicals, less water, and less land than they can with the conventional crops. And because of this, food producers, pwede sila mag-charge ng less for GMO goods since they can conserve resources. And foods like corn, beets, and soybeans may occasionally have their prices reduced by 15% to 30%, which is very beneficial kayo siya sa tuwang mga consumers. And third, may have more nutrients because some GMO crops are engineered to deliver additional vitamins and minerals. One example of this was a scientist were able to produce an altered variety of an African corn that contains 2 times as much folate than the traditional corn. Also, compared to traditional crops, it has 6 times as much vitamin C. Lastly, it contains more beta carotene than traditional corn by 169 times. And with this, it may be especially helpful sa mga regions where people suffer from nutritional deficiencies. However, despite the fact that GMO crops provides numerous benefits in terms of cost and nutrition, may mga expert pa rin who concerned that they also pose health risk. And one of the cons of these GMOs is it may cause allergic reactions because GMO foods may create allergies in people na hindi typically allergic sa isang food since it include the DNA from other creatures. One case of this one is scientists produced a GMO soybean crop which the DNA is derived from a Brazil nut, which make this crop harmful for person with nut allergies and couldn't be distributed to general public. But despite this, itong mga GMO crops, they are extensively tested for allergens para they shouldn't be necessarily more dangerous than traditional crops. And next one is they may increase antibiotic resistance. Scientists working on GMOs, they frequently introduce an additional gene to plant cells along with new DNA to confer antibiotic resistance. The remaining plant cells that weren't be able to successfully incorporate the new DNA can subsequently be eliminated using an antibiotic. Pero those scientists are discovering na these antibiotic-resistant genes sometimes they linger after you digest GMO foods and may even enter sewage systems through your feces. Dahil dito, yung ibang doctor, they are concerned that these genes could get into hazardous bacteria in our stomach or sa mga imbornal that can lead sa mga life-threatening condition like staph infection. And because of this, yung mga conventional antibiotic therapies would therefore be useless in combating new super bacteria. However, not all experts share this concern. Kasi yung iba, they claim that there is little risk that humans and that this kind of gene transfer is extremely unlikely. So yun. And now, let's talk about the GMOs versus our ecosystem. So oftentimes, this genetically modified organism is gina-introduce yun siya sa atong ecosystem with good intentions. Pero as we all know, good intentions always comes up with some dangers. And these dangers could seriously harm our ecosystem. So let's talk about the harms of GMOs in the ecosystem. The first one is the biodiversity loss. So this genetic modification, it produces genetically modified animals, plants, and organisms. And if these genetically modified organisms are introduced into the environment, they can affect in biodiversity loss. So, ano ba tong biodiversity loss? This biodiversity loss refers to the decline or disappearance of biological diversity. Biological diversity or biodiversity is ito yung different kinds of life na makikita natin in one area. The variety of animals, plants, fungi, and even microorganisms like bacteria that make up our natural world. And for example of this biodiversity loss, one is existing species can be overrun by more dominant new species. Isang example pa nitong biodiversity loss is when the spread of genetically modified crops that are herbicide tolerant and combined with herbicides has largely eliminated the monarch butterflies that habitats in North America. Another environmental risk is pleiotropy. This pleiotropy, it occurs pag yung isang gene affects two or more phenotypic or yung observable features that appear to be unrelated. Isang example nito is yung GM corn in 2008 kasi it has an unanticipated development of a distinct version of of a protein which is known as an allergen. And this allergen is a substance that can cause allergic reaction. At sa ibang tao, yung immune system nila, nire-recognize nila itong allergen as foreign or dangerous o delikado. But even though GMO have the potential to damage our ecology, meron din naman silang mas maraming advantage. First was the increased crop harvest and decreased agricultural land use. So one of the tools na ginagamit ng mga farmers para mag-cultivate ng crops that are required para ma-feed ang population while leaving an adequate land para sa human habitation are GMO seeds or genetically modified organism seeds. This is because farmers can produce better crops on less area since GMO crops directly address problems like pest, weather, disease, and food waste. In 2018, in order for farmers to maintain global output levels, they would have required to plant an extra 20 million acres of corn, 30.4 million acres of soybeans, 7.7 million acres of cotton, and 1.7 acres of canola. This if without access to GMOs. But farmers uses GMOs and able to grow the same amount of food, fuel, and fiber crops on 59.7 million fewer acres of land. Second benefit is it fosters sustainable farming practices. This GMO agriculture does exclusively use conservation tillage. Itong GMO agriculture, it does exclusively use yung conservation tillage, also known as no-till, minimal till, or reduced till farming. It is a crucial part of an integrated pest management strategy that many farmers employ in order to improve soil health and reduce carbon dioxide emissions. This kind of technique is a crucial part of an integrated pest management strategy na ginagamit ng mga farmers in order to improve soil health and reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Because of this, farmers pwede lang iwanan yung mga corn stalks after harvesting rather than tilling the entire area. Also, like soybeans, pwede nilang itanim diretso sa mga residue during the next planting season. Because of herbicide-tolerant crops, di na nila kailangan ng regular plowing sa fields. And dahil less regularly yung plowing sa fields, yung natural occurring carbon sa soil will remain. And also, because machinery is not used to plow fields, less fuel is required, which reduces the amount of CO2 that engines emit. And the third one, it reduces pesticide applications. Pesticides now have a 17.3% smaller overall environmental impact because to GMO crops. So how is it possible? So, isang example nitong GMO crop is a herbicide-tolerant crop or HT crop, which enable yung mga farmer na i-lessen yung number of treatments sa kanilang fields using pesticides. And this means rather than using several herbicides repeatedly throughout the session, yung farmers, they can use smaller number of herbicides less frequently. Similar to using one broad spectrum sunscreen rather than UVA and UVB protection. Isa pang example ng GMO crop is called insect resistant crops or IR crops, which produce the Bacillus thuringiensis protein or BT, which is commonly found in nature that kills target pests by interacting with a specific cell receptor found in their guts. Pero this receptor doesn't exist in the guts of humans, other animals, or other insects. This means that when a pest like the European corn borer starts munching on a stalk of a BT corn, it dies, pero it doesn't harm humans. Therefore, lesser insecticides needs to be applied to ward off this target pest. That's why 82% of corn and 88% of cotton grown in the US is genetically modified for insect resistance. Lastly, is it build soil structure, clean air, and conserve water. So the advantages of HT crops for the land, water, and air are all connected by lands. Farmers who uses less tilling produce soil that retains more carbon and produces fewer greenhouse gases. Lowering the amount of tilling, it also means that mas lessen yung soil erosion. And yung quantity of organic material sa soil rises as a result of the presence of more beneficial insects and the leftover of the previous crops in the field, which nag-allow na yung soil mo hold onto more moisture, and yung organic matter and moisture na nag-remain sa soil, it helps crops better withstand periods of drought or heavy rainfall. At yun, that is all the harms and benefits of the genetically modified organisms to the ecosystem. In bottom line, genetically modified organisms provide certain advantages to the producers and consumers as well harm to the ecosystem. So assessing the ecosystem safety of genetically modified organism is challenging.